They always say how your life can change in just one day. Jayme Class learned that in the worst way possible. Her mother was holding her in her arms when she was ripped away from her normal life to endure 88 days of hell. With the question as to whether she would return alive or not hanging in the air, Jayme decided she had the power to make that choice, and she managed to walk away alive. Hey guys, and welcome back to my podcast. I'm your host Lulu, and I decided today we were going to cover a lighter case. I know the last couple weeks have been really heavy cases, like the Jeffrey Dahmer case, and then we went into another woman who killed her husband and her son. And so today I just decided I wanted to start a new series and bring something a little lighter to the table to help, ease us from the heaviness of some of these cases. So we are going to go ahead and cover the Jayme Class case. This case I had actually heard of a couple times when this all went down, so I was more familiar with this case than some of the other recent ones we've been doing. And unfortunately not really unfortunately, but with a lot of these cases, you don't get a lot of background on the victim or the kidnapper. You get most of the, how they got away, which is good. So I don't have a lot of information on, Jayme when she grew up, and she did get kidnapped when she was really young, and so that could be some of the reason why. And because she was so young, a lot of what happened to her in captivity was redacted by the courts, so you can't actually get that information. So we're going to go ahead and just jump straight in like we do on a lot of my cases, and we are going to start today with her kidnapper. Now, her kidnapper was named Jake Patterson, and he was born on June 17th, 1997, to the parents of Patrick Patterson and Deborah Patterson. Now, Patrick, his father, was an electrical supply worker, and Deborah was just a homemaker. She just stayed home. They ended up getting married in 1989, and Jake ended up being the third child of the couple. His older siblings were Katie Patterson, who was the oldest, and Eric Patterson, who was the middle child. Now, I don't have a lot of information, really any information on Katie, except for that she was the oldest. I do have a little bit on Eric. Eric and Jake did spend more time together than Katie and Jake, obviously. They were closer in age, and so they just ended up, being closer. Now, this family grew up on a rural street in the woods of Wascott, I believe is how you say it. Apologize if I'm butchering that. At the time, there was less than 800 people living around them, and they did end up staying there for about 8 years. After that, and like I said, we don't know a lot about his childhood, so it's sort of just going to be really quick. In 2005, one of his parents, I'm not sure which one, ended up trying to file for divorce papers. But when you look more into this, it doesn't look like their divorce was ever finalized at this point. But it doesn't look like the other parent was ready for this, and they actually ended up 10 months after the paperwork was filed buying a house in Gordon. And this is where it is said that Jake carried out his later crimes in this area that they moved to. But then after, moving, buying a house together and whatever, they both decided in 2007 that they were both ready for this divorce. And they ended up filing on these divorce papers. So in March 31st, 2008, his mother moved out, and the marriage was then legally dissolved. His dad agreed that he would pay his mother $800 in child support, and she got a little bit more money for the house and a couple other odds and ends here and there. The court papers also showed that the children would be splitting their time between their parents' homes every other week. So one week they'd spend it at their mother's, and the next week they'd spend it at their father's. Nobody has really been able to reach out to them after this has happened. They both don't really want to have anything to do with being questioned or anything like that. So we don't have a lot of, their feelings on any of this after this situation. So here is where we're going to jump into when Jake was in high school. He attended Northwood in 2011, and he honestly didn't stand out at all. He was sort of just a background kid, and one of his classmates is quoted in saying that he was just kind of there, and more of his classmates are quoted that they just said he kept to himself a lot, and he didn't have really any issues with anybody, and he only had a couple close friends. Later, after everything went down, a lot of the guys that he was close to in school told people that he was not really interested in staying in touch with any of his close friends he had made. He didn't want to give out his email address. He didn't want anybody's phone number to contact them. And when they graduated, he was just sort of gone. And obviously, some mothers of these friends, old friends, came forward after all this happened. And one of these mothers was a mother of his old running buddy. And she's quoted in saying that he was a pretty quiet kid. She thought it was a little odd, but she kind of just chalked it up to Jake wanting to be more independent for himself. But this is where they think Jake really started to isolate himself from others. And he was choosing to do this, obviously. Jake is also recorded by the superintendent of his high school with being a very quiet kid as he grew up. He was a good student, though. She talked about how he was part of the quiz bowl team, and he did seem to like to academically compete with others, but he was not interested in playing in any sports or any other activities. I don't really see this as a weird thing. I'm going to be honest. That's kind of who I was in high school. I hated sports. I hated running. I hated doing anything that I had to really exert energy to do. But I did like, math competitions. I liked the poetry slams. I liked things like that. So I don't really feel like that is really an important thing to bring up, but that was written about in a lot of articles that I read. So in his junior year of high school, this is where things started to turn for Jake and where people started to notice a shift in Jake's personality. He began showing a very, very hot temper to his classmates. This quiet kid turned to a very angry kid. There are cases where something like as simple as throwing a ball on accident towards him and having it hitting him would set him into a blind rage. He would begin crying and screaming. He would get really upset, and he would end up whipping the ball back towards the student with as much anger as he could muster in his arm. But even though he had this explosive temper, these kind of things were the farthest he would get with getting violent. He never really got into any fights still, and he never, raised any fists to anybody as far as I saw. Just some retaliation anger, it seems like. Here's where we talk about some of the legal issues. Jake really did not have any of these legal issues, but his brother did. In 2013, his brother was convicted of 4th-degree sexual assault. And then in 2014, he was convicted for bail jumping and 2 felony counts of making and delivering THC. Obviously, in my opinion, that second charge really isn't a lot. But I can see, in 2014, that was still before, THC or anything like that was acceptable. But these left his brother serving 8 months in jail. And this really shows you the type of example that Jake had in his life. Now, being around somebody who is acting out and then charged with the sexual assault can, damage you growing up if you see it and thinking it's okay, but because it's not okay. And if Jake really looked up to this older brother and saw these things happening and he didn't think that they were an issue, I can definitely see how that would not, sit well in a young brain like Jake's was at the time this happened. There was some recorded instances, though, of his neighbor talking about how Jake and his brother, Eric, they would start doing things together like siphoning gas, and this is where they started acting out together. But even though Eric got charges, Jake never got any sort of, legal problems out of any of this, but this is where he started acting out, as well as with this explosive temper that he had gained. And this is where Jake finally graduated from high school in May of 2015. Jake was ready to be done with school. He ended up skipping his prom, a class trip, and the senior photo because he was just so checked out. And when he graduated, he decided he was going to join the Marines, and he started telling his classmates about how he was going to join the Marines and be this big, cool guy. And he joined the Marines, obviously, and this is a 13-week course that he had joined. He began this course in September of 2015, but he only lasted 5 weeks before he quote-unquote failed to meet expectations and standards, and they kicked him out. They did not elaborate onto why they kicked him out or what he failed to meet expectation-wise, but he didn't make it, obviously. And this is where he moves back to Wisconsin in 2016. And here is where he starts a streak of very short-lived jobs. He got a job at Barton Turkey Processing Plant, and he ended up quitting just 1 day after he started working. He then moved on to a wood pellet factory in Hayward, but quit about 2 days in. Then, at 21 years old, he got a job working for the Saputo Cheese Factory, and he ended up quitting 2 days in as well. But on his way to this cheese plant is when he saw 13-year-old Jayme for the first time. Here's where we're going to start getting into the events that led up to the kidnapping. Jayme was boarding her school bus in front of her house when Jake watched her get on. All he thought when he was watching her get on was, this is the girl I'm going to take. It's not really proven that he had planned on taking a kid at this point, or if this was, kind of a last minute decision that he couldn't get out of his head, but they think that this is why he quit the cheese factory job, because there was other things that he now wanted to participate in. He ended up making 2 trips prior to kidnapping Jayme to her home to try to gain the confidence that he needed to take her. He claimed that there were multiple reasons why these 2 trips were just trips and not kidnappings. One of them was because there was always too many people around or in the house. But on the 3rd time, on October 15th, 2018, is when he carried out his plan. So Jake had attached stolen license plates to his vehicle to make it harder to track him by the police, just in case he was seen taking Jayme. He disabled the dome light on the inside of the cab so it wouldn't light up or light his face up when he got in afterwards, and he cut the wire that allowed the trunk to be open from the inside so Jayme could not get out. He then dressed in all black and wore a face mask with his newly shaved head to prevent losing any DNA at the scene, and he gloved himself to leave no fingerprints at the scene or on the weapon he was going to use. He armed himself with a shotgun and headed out just before 1 a.m. When he arrived at the home, he could tell then that it was just the family there, and this was the time to carry out his plan. When he pulled into the driveway, this is where Jayme's dog started barking to alert Jayme that somebody had pulled up. This did wake Jayme up, and she quietly went to her parents' room and woke them up and told them about the dog and what she had heard. Her father instructed Jayme and her mother to go into the bathroom, close the door, barricade the door, and call the police. Then he went to investigate. Jayme and her mother did just that. They climbed into the bathtub, and they started to get the police on the phone. They hugged each other close and closed the shower curtain and tried to hide as best as possible. Now, Jayme's father, James, approached the front door to take a look. When he looked, it looked kind of like it was a police officer, he thought. So And I'm not really sure, honestly, how we know this, because James is not here to tell us this himself. And I think it's with what Jake has said. But James turned and looked out the front window and shined a flashlight at Jake and shouted at him to show him his badge. And this is where Jake raised the shotgun at James and shot him in the head. This killed James, obviously, and Jake moved on to breaking down the front door. He blew the lock apart with another shotgun blast and entered the home. When Jayme and her mother heard the shotgun, they both knew that James was dead. And this is where they officially began calling 911. I know I said they began in the bathtub, but they were waiting to call 911 until they knew that something was wrong. And Jake quickly realized they were in the bathroom, and he began breaking down the door. The door was not that hard to break down. I mean, he's obviously broken down one door already, and he just needed to kick the bathroom door in, and that's how he got in. As soon as the bathroom door was down, he yanked the shower curtain away and demanded that Jayme's mom, Denise, end the phone call with 911. Afraid of what he would do because he just shot her husband, she did that. She ended the phone call, and that is where he told Denise to tape up Jayme's mouth. So, shaking and panicking, Denise tried as best as she could to follow the directions, but Jake got frustrated with her because she was taking too long, and he took the duct tape away from Denise and did it himself. He then taped Jayme's hands behind her back and her ankles together. He yanked her out of the bathtub where her mom was desperately trying to bear hug her to herself and not let Jayme go. And when Jayme was out of the bathtub, he looked at Denise and he shot her in the head in front of Jayme. Jayme knew her father was dead and had watched her mother die in front of her. He then hauled Jayme out to his car. He slipped on the blood of her father as he drug her through the front door and threw her in his trunk. This is where he began to drive her to the remote cabin that she was going to stay at for 88 days in Gordon. He ended up passing the responding officers that were responding to a frantic 911 call that had ended in not a great situation. Jayme is recorded in telling the police that she could hear the sirens passing them, and I can imagine the helplessness she might have been feeling as she heard the help coming to her, passing her. And they arrived at her house just minutes too late. She was gone. And I just want to remind you that Jayme was 13 when this went down. Jayme was 13 when her mom was killed in front of her and her dad was taken away from her. And she had to endure these 88 days of hell. That's a very young age. I mean, you should never have to go through this at all, but at 13, that is insane. This whole attack only took about 4 minutes to carry out. And after he was caught and charged, he said that he only killed her parents because he had convinced himself that he could not leave any eyewitnesses at all. And he did not have any intent on ever letting Jayme go. He informed the officers later that if anybody would have tried to stop him or pull him over, that he would have shot all of the officers in the head, because he was determined to take Jayme and he was going to make it happen that night. Once they arrived at this cabin, he told Jayme to strip down and handed Jayme his sister's clothing. Jayme obviously listened through her tears, and Jake took her clothing and threw it in the fire. He wanted to get rid of any evidence that could be linked back to him. It is recorded by Jake himself that he did have sexual thoughts about Jayme, but the murder of her parents weighed so much on his conscience that he never acted on any of these thoughts. And I really hope that's true, and thank God for Jayme that she at least did not have to endure anything like that through this situation. This is where there isn't a lot released to the public about what happened to Jayme during these 88 days of captivity. And a lot of what was said, like I said, has been redacted by the courts, and we do not have access to it. Jayme is a child, so they obviously don't want these things out about her because she was only 13 at the time. There is some things you can see, like it is claimed that the two did things together, like playing board games. He would spend some time with Jayme, and there was times that he would actually let Jayme out and about and walk around the yard with him in the property, but she was never allowed off the property and she always had to be with him. They would also sleep in the same bed together, but once again, at least it sounds like nothing ever happened to Jayme. And it was recorded by Jake himself that at one point he drunkenly let Jayme write a letter to her aunt, but obviously he never sent it and he read it, and that's kind of where that ended. Even though that part of captivity doesn't sound so bad, this is where we get into the not great things that we do know about Jayme's stay. For most of her time, for the next 88 days, she was forced to live under the bed in Jake's cabin. The space she had was no more than 2.5 feet high, and it was only a twin bed. She would spend days where he was gone, or if he had company under that bed. He would barricade the bed off with boxes filled with heavy objects so she could not push them away. It also made it so that if she tried to push them away, he would be able to tell that she was trying to leave. It did not leave Jayme with any room to move, and she pretty much laid in the same position for hours. Anytime he would have people come over or leave, he would always tell Jayme that if she made any noise or tried to get away, something bad would happen. It is not said if he ever told her what would happen or if he would just say something bad would happen, but he would constantly remind Jayme that he was dangerous, and obviously Jayme knew this at this point because she had witnessed him shoot her mother. He started to blare music so loud in the room she was staying in that she could barely hear herself think. This was because he did not want Jayme to know if anybody else was in the home or not at the time, and if she decided to shift and make a noise, if he did have people in the home, nobody would hear her. She was forced to stay underneath that bed for 12 hours at a time with no food, no water, and no bathroom breaks. So obviously, yes, there was some times that captivity wasn't that bad, but for most of the time, she was literally laying underneath the bed alone, just thinking, probably just remembering what had happened and just trying to find a way to escape, honestly. There was one time that was recorded that you could see in the court records that he had hit her on the back with some handles of cleaning tools. It doesn't look like there was a ton of physical abuse, mostly just obviously mental abuse because she was shoved underneath a bed for 88 days, but that was recorded. And Jayme had actually tried to escape twice before she had actually succeeded. The first time she had tried to escape, Jake caught her and then proceeded to bang on all of the walls and scream at her in an attempt to scare her to never do it again. He then started reminding her more often that if she ever tried to leave him, bad things would happen to her. Whenever he'd leave the house and just through the day, he would just remind her of these things. I don't know what happened on the second attempt. I couldn't find anything about that, but I do know that there was a second attempt. Then, on a Thursday, he left, once again, reminding Jayme that bad things would happen to her if she tried to leave. But he ended up informing her that he would be gone for a couple of hours, more like 4 to 5 hours. This is where Jayme decided to push all of her fear aside and decided it was now or never, because obviously nobody knew where she was. Nobody was going to find her, and she did not want to spend any longer underneath that bed. So on January 10th, 2019, at 13 years old, she managed to push one of those heavy boxes away. And because all Jake had relied on to keep her there was mind games, he had never made any extra attempts at barricading this cabin and locking it down. And she managed to just walk out of the front door. But in her quick panic, she obviously didn't have a pair of shoes. He burned them. She could only find a pair of his shoes. And she ended up putting them on the wrong feet because she was trying to get out as soon as she could. She started walking around outside looking for help, and that is where she got lucky and spotted Jake's neighbor. She ran up to her, This was Jean Nutter, and she was walking her dog. The first thing out of Jayme's mouth when she ran up to her was, "I'm Jayme Class, and I need help." And of course, everybody knew who Jayme Class was at this point. She ran her to the nearest house that hosted Peter and Kristen Kaskaskia. This is where they called 911, and Jayme had officially saved herself. Quickly after the officers responded and picked Jayme up so she was safe, they found Jake. It wasn't hard. He'd gotten home to an empty house and was in a panic driving around the neighborhood looking for Jayme, just hoping that she had just gotten out. And that's where police stopped him. And he decided here that he had been caught and there was no lying because Jayme had been found, and he just admitted to it. He also informed them on their way to the police station that he did not know Jayme or her parents prior to murdering them and kidnapping Jayme. He just saw her getting onto the bus one day and knew. Jayme was gone for 88 days, and during that time, honestly, nobody ever gave up looking for her. Because her parents were murdered and she was gone, they had a feeling that she could possibly be alive. The police turned the small town upside down trying to find her. They investigated hundreds of tips, and hundreds of volunteers came out and searched for her. The parents' employers actually offered up some reward money to try to get people who knew anything to come forwards, but obviously nobody really saw anything. It happened so early in the morning. And even though they weren't ever getting anywhere, they never ended up giving up hope. And some of that could be how Jayme got saved, because this neighbor knew exactly who Jayme was. They weren't very far from where Jayme went missing, but everybody knew who Jayme was. Everybody was looking for Jayme. During Jake's trial, he was charged and pleaded to 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide and kidnapping, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Now, in July of 2019, he was transferred to a different prison in New Mexico because they were concerned about his safety in the Wisconsin prison that he was previously at. A lot of people knew what he had done, and he was getting into a lot of fights, and to keep him safe, they just moved him to New Mexico. Now, during this trial, and when you go look at his charges, he was not charged with any sexual assault charges. This gives me a little more confidence in knowing that Jake didn't do anything to Jayme while she was in captivity, because obviously he would have been charged with something along the lines. Even if he had attempted it, he would have still gotten charged with attempted sexual assault. So that makes me feel a little better for Jayme. Her situation was still really terrible, but at least, you know, she did not have to go through that. This case was a lot shorter because I wanted to put it all in one, and obviously we don't know a whole ton about Jake. He doesn't have a whole lot after he graduated because he was young when he kidnapped Jayme. He was only 21, and Jayme was only 13 when she got kidnapped. So that's one of the reasons why this case is a little shorter. Hopefully my next found case will be a little longer, but I still wanted to get it all in one episode regardless of the length. But anyways, Jayme Class knew that nobody was going to find her. She could either lay underneath that bed for the rest of her life, or she could push the fear aside and take back her freedom. And at 13, she did just that. And Jayme Class saved herself. There may be false or misleading information throughout this podcast. All facts have been researched to the best of my abilities, but accidents do happen. If this is a story you are interested in knowing more about, I highly recommend doing your own research. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.